Okay, so I'll go through Java 8 features, the first two features, for each and default and static methods, what they are, quite quickly to revise. For each, what is for each? For each is a new default method that has been added to the iterable interface. What does that mean? Go into Zeal, let's go into iterable, and you see there's a method called for each. And this is actually an implementation. It's not a thing that has to be implemented. It's a default method for each that has been implemented. So why is it implemented? It is implemented so that we don't have to iterate through a iterable object. If we have to do something, we can just directly do it. And how will that work? It's quite simple. Let's see this code. This is how we normally iterate through an object. We get an iterator and do dot has next, and we do it. So this entire code is kind of open and prone to error, let's just say. Let's go a little down. For each, since every iterable will now have for each, my list dot for each works. And what do I pass to it? It will take a consumer. Let's see Zeal it'll take a consumer type object. What is a consumer? Consumer is nothing but a functional interface. It's a functional interface with one method which returns void and accepts a generic type T. So you can pass it anything and it'll work on it and will not return anything. That's the consumer. So my list for each, you can create a new consumer. This is basically an anonymous class which is a child of consumer, and then you implement the accept which takes T and you do some work. This is not how actually it's supposed to work. The best way is to define different actions. So my consumer action equal to my consumer, which is actually doing this work. We can have 100 different implementations, 100 different actions, and then if you want to apply the action on a list, all we have to do is my list for each action, and boom, it will work. For this one line, this one line replaces this entire code here, and that's the advantage of for each. Now if you go down a little bit, what is for each? For each is actually a default method added to the interface. Default and static methods for interfaces was added with JDK8. Let's see what they are. A default method is a normal method like any other method, except you can write it inside an interface and you can completely flesh it out. A static method is similarly a completely static method which you can write inside an interface. Earlier, interface was not allowed to have any of these things. Now we can. To see this example a little better, I have a REPL code here. If I go to my database, my REPLs, I'll go to Java 8 features, default static methods. Let's see the actual implementation of how it works. We'll go and have an interface 1. Now an interface 1 has a method 1 which needs to be implemented, which is the standard method without any implementation, but then it has code. It has a default log method which logs interface 1 logging. In that, to support the default log method, might need additional helper methods. What will we do? Will we create more default methods? Not recommended. If it's a standard utility method, we can just use a static method, which is the one here, interface 1 log. So this is just a static method which can be called independently using interface 1 dot interface 1 log. This is again being used in the default method. So this is the log method. I'm creating one more default method called interface log 1d, which is again calling the static method. Okay, and finally we have another static method called print. So we have 3 static methods for this interface, and then 2 static methods for this interface and 2 default methods for this interface. So now you can see a lot of logic, a lot of computation can be packed inside an interface. Interface is not just a contract, it has logic now. Let's go to the interface 2. It's a very simple one. We just added an implementation for a default log. We did this to check multiple inheritance conflicts and how it works. And then method 2. Now the actual game begins. We go to my class, which implements interface 1 and interface 2. If you remember, Java never supported multiple inheritance. So if there were one class, it can only extend one more class. But it had multiple inheritance for interfaces. So it can implement as many interface as possible, which was fine because interface never had any logic. Now interface has a logic. So how do we avoid the problem, the diamond problem, where the compiler does not know which method to call? Because now interface 1 has a log method, as you can see here, and interface 2 also has a log method. So what will my class use? My class will not use any of them. My class will have to implement its own, and let's see what happens if it doesn't. Let's just keep it here and just change the signature something as new, and we'll remove the override. So now it's a new method. What works? What is happening here? Let's see. Let's try to compile the code. Okay, we got an error types interface 1 and interface 2 are incompatible. Why? Because they have same method with the same signature in both of them, and my class inherits unrelated defaults for log from types interface 1 and interface 2. These are unrelated methods in two different interfaces which it inherits, but the compiler doesn't know what to run, so it'll just not compile. So the solution is to re-implement it. Now let me re-implement it and see what happens. I'll remove all of this comments. Let's remove all of these comments and see first if it works. And we can see that's it. My class logging data. So we just we are calling this method here with data, and that's it. So if the child class re-implements the interface methods, everything is fine because now there is no confusion. Let's dig a little deeper and see this. Let's take the first value. I am saying this dot print. Now this dot print will obviously print this my class dot print. Why is this relevant? Because let's first see the standard behavior. My class dot print. Why is this relevant? Is because interface 1 also has a method called print. As we know, if a class has static methods and we do call it, so this also has a method print. If we do call it with this, it shows an error, but it still executes it. But in this case, if I do remove the print from the class, right, and try to run it, let's see what we get. A compilation error. It does not compile because even though the class implements the interfaces, using this I cannot access the static methods of the interface. Static methods of the interface are not exposed to the child objects. However, if I do something like interface 1 dot print, this will work because accessing a static method using the class name or the interface name is okay, works. Calling interface 1 dot print, right? So why was this relevant? This was relevant because we have another method here called interface log1, right? So this is also a static method. However, if I do something like this dot interface log1, now this is also a static method. That's why we get this warning. Static method from that class should be accessed in a static way. But if I run this, and it runs, so we have the class print running and then interface log1 running. So even though this is a static method and should be accessed in a static way, that is my class dot interface log1, I access it using the object and it still works. That's the standard behavior in Java. It's not recommended to use it using the object, access it using the object, but it will work. And this breaks in the case of static method. Even though print is also a static method inherited by an interface that this class implements, using this dot print will not allow me to access the static method of the interface. Okay, so with that, let's remove this, and that's it, we are gone. And now let's see the next piece of code. What is this? This is interface log1d. Now where is this interface 1d coming from? I cannot see this here. This is weird. I cannot see this here. Where will it be? Now it is not, it is implementing two interfaces. Now, earlier, if this was before Java 8, there was no way this was going to happen, because it only implements two interfaces. Interface says don't have the interface static methods I cannot access with this. Where is this coming from? Now it is the default methods. Let's go to interface 1, and here we see the static interface 1 log has the static method, interface 1 log d has the default method. Now this static method will not be accessible, but this default method will be accessible as this interface 1 log d. And if you see the default method here, what it does is just print two strings, and it will invoke the static method of the interface, which this object directly cannot. So, but the default method can, because in this context the static method is valid. So if I run this, basically it will print these two lines, and then it will go and print this line. Yes. So what we see is my class logging data, which is this line, and then we see interface log 1d called, which is the interface first line, then invoking static called, and then finally it calls the static method, which is interface 1 dot interface 1 log called. Now finally let's see this one. This is the standard call. I just added it for completeness. Interface 1 log. If I run it, it will basically access the same static method of the same class in an incorrect manner, which is yes, my class dot interface 1 log. And finally, even though the static method of the parent is not accessible to the child object, we can so this is again static method similar to this one, interface 1 log. Even though that is not accessible to the child object, using this method, this way of accessing, we can still access it using the interface name. So interface 1.print will work, and it will print calling interface.print. Let's see this in action, just to make sure everything that we are saying runs. Yeah, so calling interface 1.print, calling in interface 1.print. Where is interface 1? Calling interface 1.print, calling interface 1.print. So yes, so this is default and static methods in Java 8. So that